Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Taking a Stand, a Growing Trend for Foundation Leaders. My name is Storm Gray, and I'm the Online Education and Engagement Associate for the Council on Foundations. Before we dive into today's conversation, I just wanted to go over with you a couple of housekeeping items for your attention. Housekeeping style, 888-569-3843. Additionally, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists throughout our conversation today, and in order to do so, you would type your questions and comments. Upon the conclusion of today's webinar, please take a moment to fill out our brief survey that will appear on your screen automatically. Finally, a copy of today's webinar, including presentation slides, will be posted on the Council's website by the end of this week. Our moderator for today's conversation is Erin Dorfman, Executive Director of the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, or NCRP. NCRP, a research and advocacy organization based in D.C., works to ensure America's grantmakers are responsive to the needs of those with the least wealth, opportunity, and power. Prior to joining NCRP in 2007, Erin served for 15 years as a community organizer with 2 national organizing networks, spearheading grassroots campaigns to improve public education, expand public transportation for low-income students, and improving access to affordable housing. He frequently speaks and writes about the importance of diversity in philanthropy, the benefits of foundation funding for advocacy and community organizing, and the and transparency to lead the discussion. And with that, I will turn things over to Erin, who will introduce our panelists and frame today's conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Storm. As you can see from the slide and from the webcam photos up there, we have a tremendous panel of presenters. Dr. Sharice West Scantlebury, President and CEO of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. She has held numerous positions in philanthropy around the country. She has been on the Council's board. She has been on ABFI's board. She is currently the chair of NCRP's board, a real gem and knowledgeable leader in our sector. Glad to have her with us. We also have Dr. Robert Ross, President and CEO of the California Endowment. He has been doing some tremendous things leading the endowment in their work to build a culture of health for all Californians, make sure all residents of the state are healthy. And we're going to hear about some ways that their foundation has been taking a stand. And last but not least, we have Reverend Starsky Wilson, President and CEO of the Deaconess Foundation in St. Louis, Missouri. And in addition to his role running the foundation, Reverend Wilson also pastors a local church, and he was also named by the governor as the co-chair of the Ferguson Commission, which recently released its report with recommendations on how Ferguson and St. Louis and that community can move forward. So we're in for a real treat of a discussion today. This is, of course, a repeat of a session we did at the Council on Foundations conference this past spring. And that session was standing room only, and there was lots of great energy in the room. So the Council asked us to revisit the session via webinar this fall. We're really happy to be able to do so. Before we get started, I want to do a little bit of a poll with those of you who are on the call. Can we advance to the poll, Storm? Just want to get a sense of what you're hoping to learn from today's webinar, what you hope to get out of it. We had lots of interesting questions when we did it in person. So you can select one of these choices. Do you want the panelists to focus on how to make sure your board has your back if you're going to take a stand, or maybe you're really interested in learning how to deal with the blowback that it will result if and when your foundation takes a stand. Or maybe you want to know more about how taking a stand can advance the goals of your foundation for achieving. Or maybe you just want to hear what it looks like. What are some examples? So go ahead and vote. Click on one of those buttons. We'll keep this poll open for just 10 more seconds here. You might have interest in all of these, of course. You just can only select one. All right, 5 more seconds. Place your vote. Okay, Storm, let's see where the folks who are on the call, what the results of the poll are. Okay, a sound majority for just hearing what this looks like in practice. And a lot of people want to see how it connects to achieving impact. And it looks like this time we have less interest in how to deal with the blowback or how to make sure your board has your back, which were some of the things we got a lot of questions around when we did this in person at the council's conference. That's great. Thanks. If you could go back one slide, Storm, to the Twitter handles. There we are. If you're on social media today, go ahead and engage with us on Twitter and use the hashtag #TakingAStand. All right. So what is this business about taking a stand? Storm, if you could advance to the Desmond Tutu slide for me. You know, one of the things that I've been noticing as I've been observing the sector over the last decade is that increasingly, and I sure hope this is a real trend, I'm seeing foundation leaders actually taking serious stands on some of the issues facing their community. It used to be that we talked about ourselves as neutral conveners, or the value of the foundation as a neutral convener in the community. But more and more I'm seeing foundation leaders taking bold stands on issues. And I think this quote from Desmond Tutu is particularly poignant as we think about this question. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. And so these 3 CEOs of foundations have not, in fact, been neutral. They've been taking bold stands. And so I'm going to ask each of them to share a story with us for 5 to 7 minutes about what they and their foundations have been doing to take stands on important issues. And then we'll open it up and have more of a dialogue. So Dr. Ross, you're going to kick us off here. Tell us about how you and the California Endowment have been taking a stand.
Sure, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to all. Can you hear me okay, Aaron? Yes, okay. So yeah, so thank you. First of all, thanks for Council Foundations for hosting this, and our great friends at NCRP. Thank you, Aaron, for your leadership around raising issues of social justice and equity to the forefront of the conversation of philanthropy. And so for us, in my 5 minutes, what I'll do is I'm going to blitz through about a half dozen examples where we have chosen to take a stand with the full support of our board in each and every case. I mean, obviously, I'll just state the obvious. This is all about operating from a values orientation. And if your values, like ours, have anything to do with equity, with advancing equity, with social justice, with social change, then I would suggest that at least once a year, those of us that are in this business should find some non-grant-making way to leverage our brand, our institution, and our bully pulpit. So I'm just going to quickly run through some things we've done, and we're in the middle of one right now, and I'll share that as well. So for us, we've always believed in health equity for all and health for all. When the Affordable Care Act was being debated and passed Congress, but still, there have been many attempts to try and undo and unravel the Affordable Care Act, or also known as Obamacare. One of the things we did that we'd never done before, and we haven't done since, I'm not saying we'd never do it again, was we filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court in support of Obamacare, and making a public health science-based argument as to why Obamacare was in the best interests of the nation. In addition, we also embarked on a separate but related campaign around those that were left out of the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, particularly those undocumented immigrants, and we supported an effort, a 3-year effort, to make sure that they were part of the Medicaid expansion here in the state. So when recently the legislature and the governor approved health for undocumented children in the Medicaid program in the state of California, we actually hung a celebratory banner from our building, Health for All banner, that of which this is now the 3rd time that the LA Times has showed a picture of that banner when the issue of immigration has come up, and showing that the foundation, following the leadership of our grantees and community leaders, fully in support of health care for the undocumented. In Arizona and Indiana, we used our when the anti-immigrant legislative effort happened in Arizona, we sent letters to companies, investment companies where we had holdings in the state of Arizona, to those CEOs, saying we were very concerned about that legislation, and we just wanted to articulate our concerns about that to companies that we had investments in Arizona. We didn't immediately divest, but we just put them on notice that we hope that their voice would be could be counted on to talk about equity and fairness and opportunity. And we did the same in Indiana on the anti-LGBT marriage equality, anti-marriage equality issue that sort of came up there. In both of those cases, our voicing that concern did receive media attention locally, and so again, we're not sure how much of an impact that had in both of those cases, but we're doing it again right now today in Houston. Houston has just embarked on an anti-LGBT local initiative, and right now I have my chief investment officer checking where our investments are. Do we have any holdings in Houston? And we'll be getting those letters out in the next 24 to 48 hours, articulating our concern same way. And I invite any of you who on this call who to take a look at your investments and see if you have Houston holdings. And as a shareholder, this is shareholder activism, you are welcome and invited to express your concern, even if you don't immediately go to divestiture. Then we've also, I think many of you have done this, hopefully everyone on this call will do this, around issues of justice reform. Have you banned the box yet in your own organization? Have you taken a stand to ban the box and not allow a previous misdemeanor or felony conviction to automatically deny employment opportunity for someone who's trying to get a second chance at life? We not only banned the box this past year, but just this past week, for the first time, we actually hired someone with a history of a felony record who was convicted as a juvenile, spent 20 years in prison, and has now been hired into our communications and technology department as our first ever hire of an ex-felon. And then lastly, related to prisons and incarceration, do any of you have stock holdings in for-profit prison companies? And if you do, taking a stand to ban those kinds of investments, and interestingly, when you because you can do this quietly and take a stand, or you can do it and get a press release out, and virtually every time we do get some attention on these things, whether it's within the philanthropic press or within the local media or other kind of media. It does make for good copy. So those are examples of how we've taken stands, and I'll just say this before I hand this over to our colleagues, Aaron. The key thing there is, and I'm sure this is obvious, but I'll just state it for all of us, is if you have the conversation in the boardroom up front around an expectation of asserting our accountability around our values, and what that might look like, not just, sort of outside, not just limited to our grant making, but using the bully pulpit and the brand of the institution. The reason why we've done a half dozen of these in the last 3 years is because we've had that conversation, and I don't have to call an emergency board meeting each and every time. And so now we're at a place where it's sort of expected and a sense of rhythm, and I guarantee you a couple of my board members will send me an email about Houston. Bob, where are we on Houston? Are we there yet? So it's a matter of expectation and culture inside the boardroom and at the management team level that we're not going to run around from pillar to post trying to get media attention, but are we surgically, thoughtfully applying and expressing our values through these kinds of taking these stands? And we think there's no shortage of opportunities for philanthropy to do so.
Those are great examples. Thank you, Bob, for those. Great examples of shareholder activism. Of course, it's helpful if your foundation has a $4 billion endowment. Your shareholder activism gets taken more seriously than perhaps smaller grant makers might be taken, but nonetheless, I think it's something that every foundation can do. And also the legislative advocacy and the judicial advocacy that you did around the Affordable Care Act. Really great examples. We're going to turn now to Charisse, who is going to, oh, before I do that, I forgot to mention Bob is also, of course, co-chairing the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and also the D5 Coalition, so playing some really important roles with colleague organizations throughout the sector as well. Now we're going to turn to Charisse, who's going to talk to us about the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation's work to take a stand on education and perhaps on immigration as well in Arkansas.
Absolutely. So similar to what Bob talked about, we've taken stands on quite a few issues. Immigration being one that you mentioned, education being another, worker justice rights, employment, tax policy. The foundation has quite a history on taking a position here in Arkansas on those things that would reduce poverty, increase prosperity, and make life better for most vulnerable Arkansans. Most recently, we have taken a stand on education. And whenever you say the word education and also, of course, the word health or healthcare, everything blows up, just everything blows up. So I want to start this by saying, because I don't want to scare anybody off, I want to start this by saying whenever you say education and wanting to address any issues around education, controversy is going to ensue. But you still need to address it. So why are we doing this here in Arkansas? So in Arkansas, our education outcomes are dismal. And of course, on this call with many of our funders, everyone will say all of our education outcomes are dismal. And I don't want to out-dismal anybody in this, but Arkansas education outcomes are pretty not good. In the paper this coming week, the Parcc Assessment, which is a part of Common Core that many of us know about, is actually going to show that 70% of Arkansas students are not proficient statewide on what is assessed in the Parcc Assessment. So that means 30% are, 70% are not. And of course, that feeds into issues that we have around 86% remediation. Historically, we've been 47th in the nation on college completion. So anyway, I'm not going to go through and just talk about the dismalness of Arkansas's education. Suffice it to say, it is quite a challenge. With that challenge, our foundation has said, what do we do about this? It's one thing to just complain about it, to fuss about it, to acknowledge it, to recite statistics around it, but we're in a position to actually possibly do something around it. And so we've been in conversation with the Walton Family Foundation for a couple of years and co-funding with them on programs, policy initiatives, promoting or advancing Common Core in the state of Arkansas, because we believe those standards and what Common Core means is important for our state. And so we've been working with them for quite a while, and actually literally together made the decision that we wanted to support our state in getting a North Star and actually setting a vision for our state coming out of this place of not having good education outcomes. So we started out wanting to create a comprehensive plan for P through 20 education in the state of Arkansas that the two of us would jointly fund and partner with the State Board of Education to do it. And that's what we've done. The Rodell Foundation before us, Memphis, Kentucky, there are many states and cities that have actually done this approach to education, and foundations have supported the research, the process, the data gathering, all kinds of activities around creating a comprehensive plan for education for their state or their city or their jurisdiction. So we've actually had foundations that have gone before us who have done this. The Rodell Foundation is actually a coach or a mentor to us, along with the Skillman Foundation. So we pulled our resources. WRF, the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, and WFF, the Walton Family Foundation, we paid half for a plan to be developed. We hired a facilitator. We hired a consulting organization, BCG, who has done this work in other states and other cities to create this comprehensive strategic plan for us. We had a process where we had a 28 collaborative steering committee. We did over 8,000 surveys, interviews throughout the state. I mean, when I say it's comprehensive, and we worked hard to reach and touch everyone in the state to feed into this plan, we did so, again, jointly. So that's a bit about the how. What resulted was we actually have a vision for Arkansas and a set of recommendations that we call Forward, and the A&R is capitalized in Forward for Arkansas. We produced this report and this vision and the set of recommendations. And what we plan to do at this point, and I need to say that the recommendations were passed by the State Board of Education this past September. So that's the end result. What I left out was all of the messiness that occurred of being so bold as to say what our state needs is a North Star. What our state needs is a vision, a set of recommendations for getting ourselves out of this morass that we're in having such negative education outcomes. But in that process, it was a tough process. And it was a tough process, but I would do it again. There was a great deal of suspicion and fear on private citizens and two foundations leading this effort on behalf of the state. There were many people who called Forward backward for sets of reasons. Of course, when you name yourself Forward, it just lends itself to all kinds of jokes and prodding and the like. We worked with unusual suspects in this process. We didn't go to who people normally go to. Because there were 28 people, of course, a lot of people were left out. We have critics that say that the recommendations aren't bold enough. We have critics who say that the recommendations are too bold. So again, it's a mix. But in the end, we actually worked towards, or we actually have a North Star for Arkansas, and we have a set of recommendations for getting ourselves out of this place where we are. We also paid particular attention to schools that were in academic distress within these sets of recommendations. So when we talk about taking a stand and courage in terms of philanthropy, to step back and say, what is this question? So for the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation, do we now go for the next 20 years with 70% of our students needing remediation, not completing college, Arkansas being 70% working poor because we're not career and college ready? That's not, the answer to that has to be no. That's not acceptable for our state. And so taking a stand means actually working on those systemic change issues in our state and community change issues. We're not going to program our way out of where we are with education. It actually requires being bold and having the courage and the commitment, the flexibility to tackle or to at least offer a first step for this system. The two foundations are committed for the next several years on implementation. So planning has now morphed into implementation. And so we are committed to that implementation and working with all parties in our state on the implementation of this. Will implementation be easy? No, it won't. Will it be full of conflict? Yes, it will. Will we have fits and starts? Absolutely. Is it acceptable to be in the same place in 5 years? No, it's not. And so for us, taking the stand means that our students, at least we are working towards our students having the quality first-class education that we believe they deserve here in Arkansas, and taking chances and risks and hits and criticism is absolutely worth it, because we cannot be in the same place 2, 3, 5 years from now. Similar to what Bob said, and I'm sure Starcy is going to say in a few moments, the board of both foundations are 100% behind this. We've talked with our boards about this all along. We were transparent with our boards around this. And I know that we're going to get into Q&A around what does this look like and what does this mean at the community level, and I'm glad to do that. One of the things that we will work on together as both foundations is actually identifying what we're going to call forward communities. Those communities that we can fund that take on the principles of Forward Arkansas, so that this is both a systemic change initiative but also a community-based change initiative. So that's how we're using our resources. We're going to use this as a bully pulpit, because that's 70% not passing the Parcc exam. That is absolutely an opportunity for us to take advantage of, to say, wow, well, here's forward. Here's how we can move our state forward with this vision and this set of recommendations. So again, for us, it is not we just can't enable the resources, the dollars, the opportunity that we have to use our resources to make effective, sustainable change, systemic change in Arkansas is a responsibility that we take as an institution.
Great. Thank you, Sharice. Thank you. Good story. And nice to see the collaboration between a couple of foundations on an issue like that. So now we'll turn to Starsky. And I also forgot a couple of his board affiliations when I was first doing his introduction. He's on the board of the Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, and also recently joined the board of NCRP. So exerting his influence throughout the sector, as well as there in St. Louis. Starsky, tell us about what you've been doing there.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thanks for the opportunity to share and for the chance to be virtually here together with Bob and Sharice. Always an honor to be in their company. I want to share a little bit about our experience over the course of the last 16 months, most significantly here in St. Louis, in response to the events of August 9th, 2014, and the police killing of Michael Brown, and our varied responses there. It's helpful to note, as Sharice and Bob did, that the work that we've done over the course of this time has been an outgrowth of a broader commitment, strategy, values that are rooted in our commitment to health broadly, public health as an aim and vision for our community, a focus on child well-being, but then also a rooting in a faith heritage as the foundation that we believe is something that calls us forth to live out our mission in a certain way as well. In kind of background, we should note that in November 2013, Deaconess Foundation approved, the trustees did, a strategy that expanded on our work in organizational capacity building to focus on what we've called community capacity building, to focus on more community-engaged strategies, public policy development, advocacy as a deployment of not just our relationships, but also our own institutional and personal capital to complement our grant making. And so where we found ourselves on August 9th 2014, after having already done some work around youth violence prevention, on convening community around the development of the first regional approach to youth violence prevention, and also engaging in collaborative grant making to impact policy in our state's capital around aging out of foster care. With that kind of history in mind as asides and things we did on the side, with this new strategy and dedicated, articulated commitment, when we experienced the trauma of the death of Michael Brown on August 9th, as did many in our community and across the nation, we mapped the issue first in ways that connected to us. So we noted that there on August 9th, Michael Brown lie dead in the street at an intersection. Number one, he graduated from our state's only non-accredited, not unaccredited, but not a non-accredited school district because of a background and a history of decline there, of two school districts that have been merged, and in the last year before, we experienced those students being transferred to other districts as an option for education, and witnessed rooms full of primarily white parents telling them to go home because they didn't want drugs and crime in their schools. We also note that Mike's body lie at the dividing line between an unaccredited and an accredited school district. And the line was drawn right around the apartment complex where his grandmother lived, such that the students in that apartment complex would go to an unaccredited school district and the ones across the street went to an accredited school district. And this is all because of regional fragmentation, of policies that are connected to 100 years worth of restrictive covenants, where because of outward migration from the city of St. Louis, people set up neighborhoods and made commitments not to sell their homes to African Americans. And so on that landscape, we saw public policy as it relates to children and youth, their education. We saw a history of housing policy that directly created this situation. And we heard the voices of young people, some of which have been organizing for the last 2 years to get a higher minimum wage in the fast food workers campaign for $15 minimum wage, looking over at students from the University of Missouri, St. Louis University, Washington University, and the like, who also recognized that they had checked all the boxes. They did everything that their parents told them to do. They went to school, but quite frankly, they could have been in Mike's position. I always suggest that those young people looked up at one another and they saw this matter, that actually they're also the first generation of Americans who wouldn't do as well as their parents. With that mapping of those issues around young people and our commitment to the community's health and commitment to child well-being and creating space for young people, we saw this as our responsibility to respond. And so we leveraged these commitments that we had made in November 2013 to youth voice. And so the first thing we did was convened our executive committee, because this was still relatively new, convened our executive committee on a call literally 11 days after Mike's death, because we heard the voices of young people and suggested we need to find ways to support and articulate a commitment for those young people. So we made an immediate allocation to support youth organizing, and we made that public as a way of coming behind and providing the support for those voices and providing some institutional credence to what they were saying, inviting others to listen to their voices as well. We found ways through our own direct action presence to learn about what things were needed. So for us, taking a stand literally actually meant standing out with young people in the streets. It meant, unfortunately, at times, at least twice, being tear gassed because of this commitment that leadership is proximal. And so we had to find ourselves in space with these young people to hear their voices appropriately and to critically assess what was really going on, because the narratives that we saw in media were not exactly what we saw when we got directly involved. And so it also meant then adding the credibility of the foundation's physical presence, its leadership in those spaces. And I should say that wasn't just me. Uniquely enough, I have a board chair who is an attorney as well, and so she put on a little green hat and served as a legal observer with those who committed and volunteered to do so. So our presence there meant something about the building of relationships. It also meant that we had the capacity to leverage our privileged position for the sake of the protection and care of people who were directly impacted and affected on the ground. What this ultimately led to was an opportunity for this public witness and voice to open up the doors for collaborative grant making with others. And so we were connected with the Executives Alliance, other funders throughout the country who had interest in finding out about what was going on the ground. And we had the opportunity to partner to co-convene a meeting called Bending the Arc from Interest to Investment for a couple of days with national funders who had interest in Ferguson to help them to hear the voices of young people on the ground directly and to inform their respective investments, strategies for either investing locally or impacting their funding strategies nationally to help to advance criminal justice reform, to support youth organizing, or to consider some of the broad socially underlying conditions that we saw when we looked closely at the issues and events in Ferguson. That led to this collaborative grant-making opportunity compelled us. We were literally asked by some other funders to set up a fund where they may be able to support through us youth organizing on the ground. It led us in this annual cycle to open a new funding stream from our dedicated resources for youth organizing as well, to specify from community organizers to youth organizing specifically. And it also placed us in a position to open a process of public policy dialogue. So there in October, we got outreach from the governor's office to co-chair called the Ferguson Commission and to guide over the course of 10 months a process of 60 public meetings, all well documented, that we took as an opportunity in this convening space to say that we've got to give responsibility over to the community to hold accountable elected officials for this work. And so through those 60 public meetings, we took our role as part Truth Commission, taking testimony from people who are directly impacted and affected, part Riot Commission, documenting the events and the impact, and part public policy think tank. So we made 189 calls to action as far as public policy is concerned. We helped to negotiate passage of Senate Bill 5, the most significant municipal reform bill in the state of Missouri's history, that included for the first time a requirement for police departments to be certified. And we released that report at forwardthroughferguson.org on September 14th. I should say finally that part of what we did just before the release of the report was we began to convene at Deaconess Foundation a table of 9 community organizing entities, and they began to prioritize those nearly 200 recommendations to align them with their respective programs, platforms, and campaigns. And over the course, actually just about a week and a half ago, they held a public meeting to identify the things that were most important to them, to hold elected officials accountable, to elected officials to come and make commitments around those policy calls to action, and they filled the room at St. Louis University with about 1,100 people who wanted to continue to work to advance these policy recommendations. They hadn't worked together around the table like that before, but they continue to do that. I should say there are a couple of elected officials who decided not to come to that meeting or committed to come and did not come. One of them, we stood with those organizers the next day and visited City Hall and got a commitment from the mayor to actually answer their calls in the public space and make commitments here in short order. And the other, the Attorney General, we're meeting with tomorrow. 15 of us from those orgs are going in to place, particularly central to him, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the critical recommendations from the Commission. So we continue to press those things that we've been able to convene the community around as far as policy is concerned to make sure we're activated with community organizers well. So look forward to some thoughts, and hopefully that was helpful.
That was great, Starsky. Thank you so much. Great to hear how you're really putting the reputation of the foundation on the line and even your own bodies on the line as part of this important movement. So We are going to transition now to some Q&A and get the audience involved. You submit questions online through the questions function on the side of your screen, and then we will get to those as we can. But I want to first ask Bob to share with us his thoughts about a metric for social change philanthropy that I've heard you talk about before. Could you share those thoughts with this group?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I mean, prompted by that great, phenomenal quote from Desmond Tutu, which was on the screen, and also hearing both Starsky and Charisse, in particular, some of Charisse's comments about criticism, and I'm sure Starsky, the Deaconess Foundation, has received it as well. You know, the bottom line is if you're not receiving hate mail or hate calls, then you're not doing social justice philanthropy. If you know, this is about making, and those of you that have done community organizing work in your past lives, Aaron, you recognize this, certainly Reverend Starsky Wilson does. If you're not making people uncomfortable and moving people to vocally or verbally or in mails or letters to the editor speaking out against you and what you're trying to do, then you're not taking a risk and you're not taking a stand. So that just sort of comes with the territory. But once again, a thoughtful, strategic conversation about what taking a stand means in the boardroom and recognition of that in the boardroom means that the first time you think about it is not when the hate mail comes or the letter to the editor comes. You've talked it through in the boardroom such that it's a candid, transparent, honest conversation where you say, you know what, we're going to get pushback, we're going to get hate mail, we're going to get even folks who consider themselves our friends speaking out against what we're trying to do here, and we got to be okay with that. And I think that I assure you that both in Starsky and Charisse's case, they had those conversations up front. Certainly we do, and we kind of see them as a, you know, we got just. I'll end by saying there have been a couple of times when Rush Limbaugh has mentioned our foundation in less than glowing terms, and we consider that a badge of honor.
Nice. We have several community foundations on the webinar today, and I know that community foundations sometimes will think, well, it's easy for you endowed grant makers to take a stand, but we've got to raise money from donors every year, and we've got to worry about not offending potential donors in our community. How would you guys think about, and do any of you have thoughts about if you ran a community foundation versus an endowed grant-making institution, how would you approach this business of taking a stand?
When I was at the Foundation for Louisiana, formerly the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation, we had to raise money. So it was more a public charity than it was a community foundation. However, our board charged us with ensuring that voices of those who would not be at the table were there. So equity and inclusion was a part of our mission statement, our DNA. And there were some who took issue with those terms and that approach to philanthropy and grant making. But nonetheless, again, it was the value of that board of directors that moved us in that direction. And so I had the backing of the board when I would not just speak about equity and inclusion, but also do grant making in the areas of equity and inclusion. So I would say again, you know, what is your goal? Is your goal to be status quo and to keep things the same? Or is your goal to be a change agent, to catalyze change, which is a part of the definition of philanthropy? And in change, you know, if you're about making change in the ways that we're describing, not necessarily changing the symphony, not that I got anything against the symphony, or changing backpack programs, and I got nothing against backpack programs either. But if you're about changing this community and changing, systemically changing what's going on there, whether it is around music and education, hunger, or the like, then it requires giving voice, and it requires taking a stand in a position. Otherwise, you're just maintaining status quo, and if maintaining status quo is what you're about, then do you, but status quo is not what we need.
Yeah, great. You know, there's a good...
Hey, Aaron, this is Bob. I mean, the flip side of that, and I completely recognize that for many of the audience participants, they're not in a position, particularly, you know, we don't have to raise money, so that's a practical reality. That said, I suspect that the converse probably works as well, that by taking a stand, you draw the attention of new donors that might not have funded you in front, or energizing some of the existing base. I presume that there is an upside to that potential downside, and each. I mean, that's what leadership is about. You have to assess that risk, and with your board, and have a conversation about it. But I imagine that goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it does. And Will Miller, who leads the Wallace Foundation in New York, was previously on the board of one of the community foundations in Indiana when they faced just this decision. There's a great blog on Philanthropy New York's blog recently describing what they found in Indiana when their community foundation, in fact, took a stand for LGBT equality, and how they raised more money, not less money, after taking a stand than before. So absolutely, Bob. Starsky, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this meant transformation for us. So while we give from an endowment, we are related to the church and officially a supporting organization. And what we've found is folks who wanted to engage in this work actually asking us for opportunities to establish platforms so that they might leverage dollars through us. And so this hadn't been a part of our strategy. This was just an opportunity that, because they saw us showing leadership and engaging, they found us to be a credible partner and invited us to create ways that they could leverage relationship with us. So I encourage that there's that opportunity as well.
Great. So I got two questions from the audience here that I'm going to offer up, and then any of you that want to chime in on either or both of these, go ahead. The first is, what has surprised you the most as you wade more deeply into the work of taking a stand? And the second, so what has surprised you? Second question is, with multiple organizations involved in developing recommendations or policies, how have you avoided allowing personal egos to lead a partner organization to jump out in early hopes of being viewed as the leader? How do you avoid those ego fights, that struggle for who gets to be the leader, the spokesperson? Any of you have thoughts on that, surprises or egos?
I think with us, I mean, what I've had to learn is it takes some real intentionality, being particularly around issues in the movement for Black lives and working with younger people than I am, and usually showing up in a suit. That it actually takes some real intentionality not to allow myself to be pushed in that position, or as a foundation with independent voice to be pushing to that position. That we actually do have to cultivate a humility that says, either on the street with young people, no, you got to talk to them, I'm here to support them, or to take a backseat in policy tables so as not to go alone. This particular moment in history has called for us to be more thoughtful about intersectionality, I believe, and to say that we don't go into these spaces alone ever. So as a funder, I tend not to go into policy spaces without the voices of people who are affected directly, in as much as possible, particularly when I'm going in to speak with elected officials about particular policy recommendations. And so I just think a cultivated humility among us is really important, because we are the most likely people for someone to default to say you're the leader. So I think that's been critically important for us.
I would say the same. We had the same experience that Starsky had, and I would add that, and I love what he says about the humility and the like. And also, I would say play to strengths. That doesn't necessarily mean you get out in front and all, but play to strengths. So in working with the Walton Family Foundation, they have particular strengths around their relationships with maybe some policymakers. They have strengths in communications because there's just 10 of us here, and they actually, have a pretty good communications apparatus at the Walton Family Foundation that we don't have here. So the communications part of it, we work with them around. My point being is in agreeing with him, in agreeing with Starsky, also not so much a clash of egos. You have to be intentional and stay focused on your goal, not focused on each other and the like, but stay focused on the goal. But also play to the strengths that one organization may have with another, and also have the presence of mind to know that. So there are times in meetings where I do hang back because this meeting is more effective with Walton speaking than me speaking. Now, can I walk out of that room with my ego bruised? Sure, I could. But would that help educate kids in Arkansas? No, it won't. So, play to strengths, know and be self-aware, and focus on leadership, not so much credit and glamour.
Yeah, I mean, on the ego question, the pleasant surprise we've had is how once you begin setting a tone of taking a stand, how I and we are challenged by our own staff that's the expectation. So hey, Bob, how come we haven't weighed in on this or that issue? How come we're quiet? Why are we silent on that? How come, are you doing a blog on Ferguson? So it's really nice to see how in our staff meetings the expectation of taking a stand is really cultural and ingrained. The second thing around ego, I would say as a general rule, and our foundation is appropriately accused of this as well, we have the opposite problem, Aaron. We have the problem of wanting to be under the radar and not being out there. And some of it is from fear. Some of it is because none of us believe that we should be outshining the work of our grantees. So, and all of that's fair. However, sometimes, your grantees will appreciate you amplifying their voice through the action you take. And so, I think if anything, we have the opposite problem, which is we spend a lot of time curating and nurturing and building this institutional brand and reputation, and then we don't spend it. And so that brand and institutional capital is there to be spent, not foolishly, not stupidly. So one example, just as Cherise talked about working with the Walton Foundation, we probably here in LA, we probably could not do a visible partnership with the Walton Foundation. There's too much labor union politics, infused into Los Angeles County, where the Walton Family Foundation and some of the work they've done around charter schools, it just wouldn't play well here. But it's a smart, thoughtful, taking a stand that works for Cherise in Arkansas that may not work for us here in Los Angeles and in California. But again, the brand and reputation are there for you to spend on behalf of your mission and in support of the work, the courageous work that your grantees are doing.
Great. Two more questions, and then I think we'll have to bring this to a close. And I'm sorry to the numerous questions we didn't get to, but I'll use my moderator's prerogative to pull two that I think are interesting. So one is, which of your non-grant making activities do you feel has been most impactful when taking a stand? And the other question is, for a foundation where this isn't in a conversation in the boardroom yet, how can staff get this onto the agenda with the board? How can they bring that so the board starts talking about whether they want to be this kind of institution that takes a stand? Anybody have thoughts on either of those two questions? How do we get it in front of the board, and what non-grant making activities had the biggest impact when taking a stand?
Yeah, I'll jump in. For me, these two opportunities I've had on a smaller level with the youth violence, co-chairing youth violence prevention planning task force for the region for St. Louis City, East St. Louis, and St. Louis County, and then the Ferguson Commission, co-chairing that commission process, have both been, I think, most impactful. We literally, as a community, have had a protracted policy discussion about racial equity and produced a set of a policy agenda based upon racial equity in the Ferguson Commission report. And that's something that regions don't necessarily do in the same way, and very seldom are they done in civically engaged, citizen-led processes. So in taking the opportunity to kind of live out our commitment that philanthropy is to be the social venture capital for social change, and that B, that living in a community that calls itself an inclusive democracy but seems to be moving away from that, taking the opportunity to take the Ferguson Commission process, open it up to the community, to say this won't be closed door, this will all be public, we're going to engage 2,000 citizens, and we're going to make these recommendations together, has had impact because it gave people the opportunity to directly affect policy in their communities, and it was able to open a table to say children should be at the center of it from our own perspective, because it's a generational work. So I think that's probably been the most impactful work that we've done that's non-grant making activity.
And similarly, we've hired consultants or TA providers, technical assistance providers, to work with grantees to prepare their ability to have their voice raised. We have supported facilitators to, one, we've done convenings or organized convenings, used our capital, as Bob talked about earlier, used our capital to convene tables around issues, whether it was worker justice rights, tax policy, early childhood education, so the convening, and hired the facilitator, because oftentimes you get groups who can't afford a high quality, and I mean a high quality, excellent facilitator to those meetings. And again, it's a way to bring voices together, build an agenda, build a platform, and keep things moving. And then even a facilitator to move the process along. So those are a couple of examples of how some non-grant making activities. And your second question about how to get on the agenda, when this might not be something, an issue may not be something for your board. And one of the things we actually, in our early work with working with men and wanting to do work around men and boys, data speaks volumes. And I mean, I've worked with, not just here, but in Louisiana, Parcc Foundation, where when you really present the data and tell the story in a compelling way, and then offer how the foundation could work on these particular issues, you can actually get some hearts and minds changed on your board. Now, you have to listen to your board because how radical you approach this or how forcefully you go after it just depends upon the appetite of the board. But just getting started, I would highly recommend data. Now, I'm not talking about sitting there with a PowerPoint and presenting data. I mean actually telling the story of what this data is saying about this community or this particular issue and how the foundation could use its resources to address it. So it's in a very methodical, intentional way might be one suggestion.
Great. Well, I see the clock has struck 3 o'clock here in the Eastern Time Zone, so we're about out of time. Any closing thoughts from any of you? Anything you wish I'd asked you or someone had asked you that we didn't get to?
Just on the second half of that, the last speaker's question, audience's question, here's a different way to think about it, because one way is to be opportunistic in taking a stand. Another way is to build in the strategic opportunity to do it. So that might mean in the next initiative, strategic initiative that you bring to your board of directors, have a taking a stand component to that strategy. So whether it's early childhood, domestic violence, whatever it is, how do you plan to deploy the institutional brand non-grant-making assets into the strategy? So you're going to fund these 3 organizations with these organizations, and in addition, we're going to be expected to convene X, Y, and Z, op-ed A, B, and C, embark on an impact investing strategy or portfolio strategy, so that you kind of build taking the stand into the base strategy of what you're doing, rather than thinking about it as an opportunistic afterthought.
Great, thank you. Sharice, any closing thoughts?
Again, I just feel strongly that if do you want to still see kids and families not get what they deserve or need? Do you want things to be the same 2, 3, 5 years ago, when you actually have the power, the resources, the capital to catalyze change? I just get so terribly disappointed in hearing colleagues complain about the same sets of issues and haven't done a thing to work towards addressing them, when we have the clout, the capital, and the like to do so. So for me, taking a stand is asking the question, if status quo is fine with you, then that's fine with you, but is that really acceptable? And if it's not, then we need to take a stand on making the change that we want to see happen.
Right. Starsky?
Yeah, I think this weaves with part of Bob's story, but I think it's just broadly thinking about what your assets are for advancing social change. You've got more than your grant-making assets. You've got your endowment. You've got more than your endowment. You've got your human capital. You've got more than your human capital. You've got your institutional reputation. The question is, are you leaving it all out on the field when it comes time to make social change for those whom you serve and whom your mission is ultimately given to? And unless we're taking the opportunity to use our voice, our reputation, our investment capital, as well as our grant making, then we could be leaving 95, 97, 99% of what we could be using to advance our missions underutilized. And so these are just new opportunities to be thoughtful and creative about how we build the vision of the world that we believe God intended for all of us.
Great. Well, thank you to each of you for being on the webinar today. Thank you to all the participants who joined us for the session today. The recording will be made available, and thank you to the Council on Foundations for hosting this. Storm, anything else?
No, just to echo your thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for all the comments and questions and feedback that you all have given. Please take a moment to, at the end of this webinar, to fill out our survey to let us know what other topics you would like for us to cover. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Aaron, for leading a wonderful conversation, very insightful, and we appreciate all the work that you all are doing. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks.